The paper crinkled softly as Daniel Reed smoothed it across the counter. His fingers moved with practiced care, folding the corners just right before reaching for the tape dispenser. Behind him, the small stationery shop hummed with the quiet sounds of a slow afternoon on station harmony. Somewhere in the back, a climate control unit clicked on, keeping the temperature perfect for preserving delicate papers and inks. "Is it straight?" Scylla asked, her voice carrying that particular mix of excitement and worry that only children seem to master. Her scaled head tilted sideways, catching the light from the overhead panels. The iridescent blue-green of her skin shifted between colors as she moved. Daniel stepped back, studying the drawing with the same seriousness he might give a priceless painting. The young Drakari had sketched her family's merchant ship in colored pencil, all bold lines and enthusiastic color choices that didn't quite match reality but captured something more important. Joy, maybe. Pride in her home. "Perfect," he said, pressing the final piece of tape against the wall, right there between the nebula picture and the star map. Scylla's tail swished happily, nearly knocking over a display of fountain pens. She caught it just in time, her reflexes already showing the speed her species would possess as adults. Sorry, she whispered, even though nothing had fallen. "No harm done." Daniel returned to the counter, his slight limp barely noticeable unless someone watched carefully. Most didn't. Most people who visited his shop saw exactly what they expected: a middle-aged human selling obsolete supplies to the handful of species who still appreciated physical paper and ink. The girl pressed her snout close to the wall, admiring her work among the dozens of other drawings that covered the space behind the register. Dragons flying through asteroid fields. Family portraits with too many limbs and creative interpretations of anatomy. Spaceships that defied physics but soared on imagination alone. "Do you really like it?" Scylla asked. "Or are you just being nice because I'm a customer?" Daniel considered the question with the respect it deserved. Through the shop's front window, he could see Kareth waiting outside, the girl's mother too large to fit through the door comfortably. The adult Drakari stood patiently, her massive form drawing nervous glances from passing merchants. "I like it because it shows me how you see the world," Daniel said. "That's what good art does. It's not about making things look exactly right. It's about sharing your perspective." Scylla's eyes widened slightly. Among her people, sharing perspective was considered an act of trust. Her mother had explained that humans sometimes said things without understanding their weight, but this shopkeeper seemed different. He chose his words carefully, like he knew what they meant. "Next time, I'll show you something about shading," Daniel continued, pulling out a piece of scrap paper. His pencil moved quickly, demonstrating how light and shadow could give dimension to a flat drawing. "See how this makes the ship look more solid? More real?" The girl leaned in, fascinated. Her claws clicked softly against the counter as she shifted her weight. "Can you teach me?" "I can try." Daniel smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way that made him look younger than his gray-streaked hair suggested. "Learning is something you do, though. I just point you in the right direction." They spent another 10 minutes going over basic techniques. Daniel explained things simply, without condescension, treating Scylla's questions as legitimate and important. When she finally gathered her remaining pencils and headed for the door, she paused. "My brother says most species are scared of us," she said quietly. "He says they think we're going to hurt them just because we're big and have teeth and claws." Daniel's hand moved unconsciously to his left shoulder, fingers brushing against the fabric of his simple shirt. "People fear what they don't understand," he said. "That's not your fault. It's their limitation, not yours. You're not scared." "No," he agreed. "I'm not." Scylla nodded, processing this, then rushed outside to where her mother waited. Through the window, Daniel watched the girl animatedly describe the shading lesson, her tail creating elaborate shapes in the air. Kareth's massive head lowered, listening, and then she looked toward the shop. Her eyes met Daniel's for a moment. She nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement that crossed species barriers. Daniel returned the nod and turned back to his work. The shop needed restocking. A shipment of specialty inks had arrived that morning, and they wouldn't organize themselves. He moved through the familiar routine, finding comfort in the simple tasks. Checking inventory, arranging displays, making sure everything had its place. His life here was quiet, predictable, safe. Exactly what he'd wanted when he'd arrived at Station Harmony 5 years ago with nothing but a small savings account and a desperate need to disappear into anonymity. The merchant district had welcomed him without too many questions. Business licenses were easy enough to obtain if you had clean records and sufficient funds. Nobody asked why a human in his 40s wanted to sell paper and pens when most of the galaxy had moved on to digital everything. The few customers who did come appreciated the personal touch, the careful recommendations, the knowledge that went beyond simple sales pitches into genuine expertise about materials and techniques. Daniel had discovered that helping people find the right tools for their creative projects brought a satisfaction he hadn't felt in years. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, the traffic outside his shop thinned. Most merchants were closing up, heading back to their quarters or to the station's recreation areas. Daniel began his own closing routine, counting the cash equivalent in his register, making notes about items running low. His sleeve rode up slightly as he reached for the overhead lights. The edge of a tattoo peeked out, dark lines against his skin forming shapes that might have been feathers. He tugged the fabric back down quickly, an old habit reasserting itself. The shop went dark except for the security lighting. Daniel locked the door, tested it twice, and headed down the corridor toward his small apartment 3 levels up. His limp was more pronounced now, the old injury making itself known after a long day on his feet. Behind him, Sila's drawing hung on the wall with all the others, a splash of color in the dimness. Tomorrow, more children would come. More art would be created. More small moments of connection would happen in the quiet space he'd built. It was enough, he told himself. It had to be enough. The corridor echoed with his footsteps, and somewhere in the distance, Station Harmony hummed with the life of thousands of beings going about their evening routines, none of them knowing that the gentle shopkeeper who sold them paper had once flown through hostile space with a falcon's precision and a warrior's heart. 6 days had passed since Sila's last visit when the veteran officer walked through the door. Daniel noticed her immediately, not because of the military uniform, but because of how she moved. Economy of motion. Eyes that tracked everything without seeming to stare. The kind of awareness that came from training and experience, not paranoia. "Good afternoon," he said from behind the counter, where he'd been sorting through a new shipment of archival papers. "Welcome. Let me know if you need help finding anything." Captain Lyra Austin nodded, her sharp features softening slightly into something approaching a smile. The feathers that blended into her hairline caught the light, showing traces of silver among the dark brown. She moved deeper into the shop, her gaze sweeping across the shelves with professional efficiency. "I need archival quality paper," she said. "Something that will last decades without degradation. We're updating our hard copy record system." Daniel set down the invoice he'd been reviewing. "For official documents, military incident reports. Chain of command requires physical backups for certain classifications." Lyra ran her fingers along a stack of cream-colored paper, testing the texture. "Digital systems can be corrupted or hacked. Paper endures. Smart policy." Daniel moved to a different section of the shop, his limp pronounced enough that Lyra's eyes flickered downward for just a moment. "Most species have moved away from hard copies entirely. Your people still value permanent records." "We do." Lyra followed him, maintaining a respectful distance. "Veteran history was nearly lost twice during our expansion period. Digital archives failed. Only the physical documents survived." Daniel reached for a shelf above his head, stretching to grab a particular sample book. As his arm extended, his sleeve pulled back several centimeters. The movement exposed his forearm and part of his upper arm, revealing the edge of something dark against his skin. Angular patterns, precise lines that suggested deliberate design rather than decorative art. Lyra's eyes locked onto the marking. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. A subtle stiffening, a recalibration of attention. Daniel brought down the sample book, his sleeve falling back into place. If he noticed a reaction, he gave no sign. "This is acid-free cotton fiber paper, treated for longevity. It'll outlast most digital storage by centuries if kept in proper conditions. He opened the book, showing her different weights and textures. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he explained the properties of each option. Strong hands, Lyra noticed, scarred in small ways that spoke of work and use. The kind of hands that had done more than shuffle papers. The 70-pound weight would work well for your purposes, Daniel continued. Heavy enough to feel substantial, light enough to store in quantity without taking up excessive space. You seem quite knowledgeable about archival requirements. Lyra's voice remained casual, but her eyes were sharp. Did you work in record-keeping before opening this shop? I've always appreciated things that last. Daniel met her gaze steadily. Too much in the galaxy is temporary, disposable. There's value in permanence. Indeed, Lyra selected several samples, her movements deliberate. How long have you operated this establishment? 5 years this station cycle. Daniel pulled out an order form, old-fashioned paper, of course. Are you new to Station Harmony? I don't remember seeing you before. I've commanded the security patrol vessel Windshire for 3 months, Lyra said. My duties keep me mobile. This is my first time needing specialty supplies from the merchant district. Daniel nodded, writing down specifications in neat, precise handwriting. Military neat, Lyra thought. The kind of penmanship drilled into soldiers who needed to write reports that others could read quickly under stress. I'll need 4 reams to start, Lyra said, with compatible ink that won't fade or smudge. Carbon-based ink works best with this paper. Daniel moved to another shelf, pulling down bottles without needing to check labels. He knew his inventory intimately. Waterproof, light-fast, chemically stable. As he reached for the bottles, his shirt pulled tight across his shoulders. Lyra caught a glimpse of more markings beneath the fabric. Something larger, more elaborate. The kind of tattoo that carried meaning beyond decoration. You have an interesting collection here, she said, gesturing at the children's drawings covering the wall. Local artists? Young ones, mostly. Daniel's expression warmed genuinely. They come in for supplies, and I encourage them to share their work. Costs me nothing but wall space, and it makes them happy. Lyra studied the drawings more carefully. She recognized several species represented in the art. Human children, yes, but also Dracari, Vadran, even a few from species known for being insular and mistrustful. All their artwork displayed together, given equal prominence. That's unusually inclusive, she observed. Many merchants cater to specific demographics. Children are children, Daniel said simply. They all deserve encouragement. He tallied up her purchases, his mental arithmetic quick and accurate. Lyra watched his eyes as he calculated, noting the way they moved. Pattern recognition, spatial awareness, the kind of processing that came naturally to pilots and navigators. May I ask a personal question? Lyra said as he wrapped her order in protective paper. Daniel paused, his hands stilling for just a moment. You can ask. You're limp. Old injury. Very old. Daniel resumed wrapping. Nothing that interferes with running a shop. I wasn't suggesting it did. Lyra kept her voice neutral. I've seen similar injuries in veterans. Wondered if you'd served. The silence that followed lasted only seconds, but Lyra felt the weight of it. Daniel finished wrapping the package, secured it with tape, and met her eyes directly. I've served my time, he said quietly. Now I serve customers. Simpler. Quieter. Nothing wrong with quiet. Lyra accepted the package, noting how carefully he'd wrapped everything. Attention to detail. Pride in work well done. Though sometimes the galaxy doesn't cooperate with our preferences for peace. No, Daniel agreed. It doesn't. Lyra paid for her supplies. The transaction completed smoothly. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. Thank you for your help. I may return if these work well, for our purposes. You're welcome anytime. Daniel had already returned to his inventory work, but something in his posture suggested he remained aware of her presence until the door closed behind her. Lyra walked back toward the security section of the station, her mind working through what she'd observed. A human shopkeeper with a military bearing he couldn't quite hide. Tattoos that suggested service. Possibly elite service given the artistic quality visible in that brief glimpse. A limp consistent with serious trauma. Knowledge that went beyond simple retail work. And most interestingly, a man who'd chosen anonymity in a merchant district rather than whatever life he'd left behind. She made a mental note to run a background check. Nothing invasive, just the standard security review allowed for anyone operating a business on the station. Probably nothing would come of it. Probably he was exactly what he appeared to be, a retired serviceman living out his years in peace. But Lyra hadn't survived 2 decades in military intelligence by ignoring her instincts. And her instincts said Daniel Reed had stories he wasn't telling, skills he wasn't using, and a past that didn't quite match the quiet present he'd built. The question was whether any of that mattered. Whether the man selling paper in the merchant district posed any risk to station security, or whether he'd simply earned the right to be left alone that she'd find out soon enough. For now, she had reports to file and duties to attend to. But she'd be back to that shop. She was certain of it. Behind her, unaware of her thoughts, Daniel continued his work. The afternoon light filtered through his windows, illuminating dust motes and the bright colors of children's artwork. His hands moved steadily, organizing and arranging, creating order from chaos one small task at a time. The falcon on his shoulder remained hidden beneath simple fabric, a reminder of skies he no longer flew through and battles he no longer fought. The database search took longer than Lyra expected. She sat in her small office aboard the wind shear, watching progress indicators crawl across her screen as the system cross-referenced Daniel Reed's identification against military and civilian records throughout the sector. His merchant credentials were legitimate. Clean financial records. No outstanding warrants or flags. He paid his taxes on time, maintained proper licensing, and had never generated a single complaint from customers or neighboring businesses. 5 years of perfectly ordinary, unremarkable civilian life. Before that, nothing. The record simply stopped, as if Daniel Reed had materialized fully formed at the age of 43 with a bank account and a business plan. Lyra leaned back in her chair, considering. People didn't just appear from nowhere. Everyone had a past, a history, a trail of documentation following them through life. Except Daniel Reed apparently didn't, or at least not under that name. She ran a secondary search, broadening parameters. Former military personnel who'd separated from service around the right time frame. Humans specifically, given the species match. The list was extensive but manageable. She added physical descriptors. Age range, distinctive features, injury patterns consistent with what she'd observed. The list narrowed considerably. Then she added one more filter. Personnel with flight training and reconnaissance specialization. Based on the movement patterns and spatial awareness, she'd noted 0.3 names came back. 2 were accounted for in other sectors, their current activities well documented. The 3rd had no current location listed. Status: honorably discharged medical. No forwarding information. Records sealed at personal request, which was unusual but not unheard of for certain classifications of service. The file photo was 15 years old, but Lyra recognized the face. Younger without the gray hair or the lines around the eyes, but definitely the same man. The name in the file wasn't Daniel Reed. She didn't access the sealed records. That would require justification she couldn't provide, and frankly, she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Whatever he'd done, whatever he'd been, clearly he'd paid his dues and earned the right to walk away. Still, the mystery nagged at her. Meanwhile, back in the merchant district, Daniel was teaching perspective to an unusual pair of students. Scylla had returned with her older brother Torvin, whose massive frame filled the shop's doorway uncomfortably. The adolescent Drakari had to hunch his shoulders to fit inside, and he moved with exaggerated care to avoid knocking things over. "I don't need to learn drawing," Torvin said, but his eyes kept drifting to the technical manual Daniel had casually left open on the counter. Ship schematics, rendered in precise detail. "Nobody needs to learn anything," Daniel replied mildly. "But learning makes life more interesting. Scylla, show your brother what we worked on last time." The young Drakari proudly demonstrated her shading technique, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated on making the shadows fall correctly. Torvin watched, tried to appear disinterested but clearly paying attention. The principle is the same whether you're drawing for art or for technical plans, Daniel explained, pulling out fresh paper. Understanding how three-dimensional objects translate to two-dimensional representation. Here, try this. He sketched a simple cube, then showed them how changing the viewing angle changed the visible faces and proportions. Torvin's eyes lit up despite himself. This was practical, useful, the kind of skill that would help him understand ship designs, maybe even create his own modifications someday. You understand projection really well, Torvin said, watching Daniel's pencil create a complex geometric form with practiced ease. Did you study engineering? I studied a lot of things. Daniel handed Torvin a pencil. Try drawing this from a different angle. Imagine you're looking at it from above. Torvin took the pencil awkwardly. His claws made precise work difficult, but he managed. Daniel watched patiently, offering gentle corrections when the perspective skewed wrong. Never criticism, just guidance. The same tone he used with Scylla.it surprised Torvin. Most adults either treated young Drakari with fear or with excessive caution, as if they might explode into violence at any moment. His people had a reputation, deserved or not, for being aggressive and dangerous. Adolescents especially were considered volatile, their strength outpacing their emotional control. But this human shopkeeper seemed completely unconcerned. He stood within easy reach of Torvin's claws and tail, correcting his grip on the pencil, pointing out mistakes without any trace of nervousness. Like Torvin was just another student, not a potential threat. Why aren't you afraid of us? Torvin asked bluntly. Scylla made a small noise of protest at his rudeness, but Daniel just smiled. Should I be? Most people are. Most people fear what they don't understand, Daniel said, echoing what he'd told Scylla before. I prefer to understand things before deciding whether fear is appropriate. And you understand, Drakari. I understand that you're both people learning to navigate a complicated galaxy, Daniel replied. Same as everyone else. Being bigger and stronger than most species doesn't make you monsters. It just makes you bigger and stronger. Torvin absorbed this, then returned to his drawing. The session continued for another hour. Daniel showed them how to use vanishing points, how to create depth through overlapping shapes, how to make technical drawings clear and readable. His teaching was patient but precise, offering exactly the information needed without overwhelming them. When their mother finally called them back, Torvin hesitated at the door. Thank you, he said awkwardly. This was actually helpful. Come back anytime. Daniel began cleaning up the scattered papers and pencils. Both of you. Learning is always worth the time. After they left, Daniel stood at his window, watching them rejoin Kareth. The massive Drakari mother listened to both children talking excitedly, her tail swaying with pleasure. She looked toward the shop again, and this time she made a formal gesture, a specific movement of her clawed hand that Daniel recognized from his old briefings on Drakari culture. Honor acknowledgement. Reserved for those who showed respect to Drakari younglings without expectation of reward. Daniel returned the gesture carefully, precisely. Kareth's eyes widened slightly, surprised that a human wouldn't know the proper response. Then she nodded and guided her children away. That evening, Lyra returned to the shop just before closing. Daniel looked up from his ledger as she entered, his expression neutral but not unwelcoming. Captain Austin, did the paper not meet your requirements? The paper was perfect. Lyra closed the door behind her, noting that the street outside had emptied for the evening. I came to ask a different question. Daniel set down his pen and waited. I ran a background check, Lyra said directly. Standard security procedure for all merchants. Your records are remarkably clean. I've never broken any laws on this station. No, you haven't. But your records are also remarkably short. 5 years. Before that, nothing. She paused, almost like you didn't exist. I existed, Daniel said quietly. Just not here. Not like this. I'm not trying to expose you or cause problems, Lyra continued. But as station security, I need to know if you represent any kind of risk. Daniel considered her words carefully. Outside, the corridor lights dimmed to evening mode. The shop felt smaller somehow, more intimate in the gathering shadows. I represent no risk to this station or anyone on it, he said finally. I came here to escape attention, not to cause trouble. I just want to run my shop and be left alone. Why? Because I earned it. For the first time, something hard crept into Daniel's voice. I gave 20 years. I did my duty. When I couldn't do it anymore, I left. That's all. Lyra studied him for a long moment. She thought about the sealed records, the medical discharge, the careful way he moved, the tattoos he kept hidden, the teaching he gave freely to children from species that frightened most others. All right, she said. I believe you. Daniel's shoulders relaxed slightly. Thank you. But if circumstances change, if I need to know more for legitimate security reasons, I'll ask. And I'll expect honest answers. Fair enough. Lyra turned to leave, then paused. The Drakari children. You teach them drawing? Among others, yes. That family has a difficult reputation in some sectors. Karatha's husband was a war leader. Many species still fear their name. Children aren't responsible for their parents' choices, Daniel said. And fear based on reputation rather than actions is just prejudice wearing a different mask. Lyra smiled slightly, spoken like someone who understands both sides of that equation. She left him to his closing routine, walking back through the quiet corridors of Station Harmony. Tomorrow she'd file her report. Merchant cleared, no security concerns. The sealed military records would stay sealed. Whatever Daniel Reed had been before didn't matter as much as what he was now, the shopkeeper. A teacher, a quiet man living a quiet life. Sometimes, Lyra thought, that was enough. The emergency siren shattered the evening quiet without warning. Daniel's hands stilled on the lock he'd been turning, every muscle in his body suddenly alert. The sound was distinctive, different from the regular drills that Station Harmony ran monthly. This was real. Around him, merchants and residents poured from their shops and quarters, confusion turning rapidly to fear as the public address system crackled to life. Security breach in Maintenance Sector 7. All civilians proceed immediately to designated safe zones. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Daniel's mind shifted into old patterns before he could stop it. Maintenance Sector 7 connected directly to the merchant district through 3 access corridors. If hostiles had breached there, they'd reach civilian areas within minutes. His eyes tracked the crowd flow, noting bottlenecks, calculating evacuation times, too slow. The crowd was panicking, moving inefficiently. Parents searching for children, elderly struggling to keep pace. He saw Karatha's massive form 3 shops down, her head swiveling frantically. Then he heard the scream. High-pitched, terrified, unmistakably Sila's voice. The crowd surged toward the main evacuation route, away from the scream. Standard survival instinct, flee from danger. But Daniel turned toward it, his limp forgotten as training overrode civilian programming. His legs moved, carrying him against the flow of bodies. Toward the source of fear, he found her in a side corridor, the narrow space that connected to a service passage. 3 Krell raiders blocked her escape, their reptilian features twisted in cruel amusement. They wore mismatched armor and carried weapons that looked well used. Pirates, not military. Opportunistic predators taking advantage of chaos. Sila pressed herself against the wall, her scales pale with terror. She was small for her species, still young enough to be vulnerable. The Krell knew it. One of them reached for her with a clawed hand, laughing at her distress. Leave her alone. Daniel's voice cut through the corridor, sharp and cold. Nothing like the gentle shopkeeper's tone. This was command voice, the kind that expected instant obedience. The 3 Krell turned surprised. The nearest one, bigger than the others with a jagged scar across his snout, looked Daniel up and down and snorted with contempt. Walk away, human. This doesn't concern you. Last chance, Daniel said quietly. Step away from the child. The scarred Krell laughed and moved toward him instead. Or what? You'll bleed on us. Daniel's hand shot out, faster than the Krell expected. He grabbed a maintenance rod from a nearby tool rack, the metal bar about a meter long and solid enough to serve. His stance shifted, weight balanced, and suddenly the limping shopkeeper disappeared entirely. The scarred Krell lunged. Daniel sidestepped with economical precision, his body remembering patterns drilled into muscle memory over decades. The rod swung in a tight arc, catching the Krell's knee joint with surgical accuracy. Bone cracked. The raider went down hard. The second Krell raised his weapon, some kind of energy pistol. Daniel was already moving, closing distance before the weapon could track him properly. He drove the rod into the raider's wrist, forcing the weapon up and away. His free hand struck the Krell's throat, precise force to the nerve cluster that would paralyze without killing. The raider collapsed, gasping. The third Krell was smarter. He grabbed Scylla, using her as a shield, his blade pressed against her neck. Back off, or the hatchling dies. Daniel stopped, his eyes fixed on the raider with absolute focus. You hurt her, and you die. Simple as that. Big talk for Shopkeeper. But the Krell's voice wavered slightly. Something in Daniel's eyes, in his absolute stillness, triggered prey recognition. I'm going to count to 3, Daniel said, his voice flat and cold. 1. The Krell pressed the blade closer. Scylla whimpered. 2. Daniel's weight shifted almost imperceptibly. The rod in his hand adjusted angle by millimeters. His breathing slowed, entering the calm space where training lived. 20 years of combat experience compressed into the space between heartbeats. 3. He moved, not toward the Krell, but to the side, drawing the raider's attention and weapon in that direction. Then he pivoted, the rod leaving his hand in a precisely calculated throw. It wasn't a killing strike, but it didn't need to be. The rod hit the Krell's elbow joint with enough force to shatter bone, and the blade clattered away from Scylla's throat. Daniel covered the distance before the Krell could recover. His hands found pressure points with the accuracy of someone who'd studied anatomy for combat purposes. The raider went down unconscious, no longer a threat. Scylla stood frozen, trembling. Daniel's demeanor shifted instantly, the cold warrior replaced by gentle concern. He knelt beside her, his voice soft again. Are you hurt? Did they harm you? She shook her head mutely, tears streaming down her scaled face. Daniel pulled her into a protective embrace, shielding her from the sight of the incapacitated raiders. His shirt had torn during the fight, the fabric split across his left shoulder. The tattoo was fully visible now. An elaborate falcon rendered in dark ink, wings spread across his shoulder blade and upper back, every feather detailed with artistic precision. Beneath it, in crisp military lettering, 82nd Reconnaissance Wing. Below that, a series of numbers and symbols that meant nothing to most civilians, but everything to military personnel who understood commendation codes. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Heavy boots moving fast. Lyra appeared with 4 security officers, weapons drawn. She took in the scene with trained efficiency. 3 disabled raiders, 1 terrified child, and Daniel Reed holding her protectively while sporting injuries and visible military markings he'd previously kept hidden. Their eyes met across the corridor. Understanding passed between them, wordless and complete. Secure the hostiles, Lyra ordered her team. Then, to Daniel, is she hurt? Scared, not injured. Daniel stood slowly, keeping himself between Scylla and the security team until he was certain they represented safety, not threat. Old instincts died hard. Caratha's roar echoed through the station before she physically arrived. The massive Drakari mother burst into the corridor with enough force to crack the deck plating, her eyes wild with parental terror. She saw her daughter, saw Daniel covered in torn fabric and other people's blood, and her brain performed calculations that led to one conclusion. Scylla. Carat scooped up her child with gentle claws that could have torn through steel. She turned to Daniel, and to Lyra's surprise, she lowered her massive head in a gesture of profound respect. You protected her. Anyone would have, Daniel said quietly. No, Carat said firmly. Most would have run. You ran toward danger to save my child. This is not a small thing. More security forces arrived. Station protocols required witness statements, medical checks, incident reports. Daniel cooperated mechanically, answering questions with the minimum detail necessary. Yes, he'd intervened. No, he hadn't killed anyone. Yes, he understood the risks he'd taken. Lyra watched him deflect questions about his combat training with practiced ease. She said nothing, filing her own observations mentally. The sealed military records suddenly made more sense. Elite reconnaissance didn't just mean flying scout ships. It meant operating behind enemy lines, often alone, often with nothing but improvised weapons and training. The kind of training that let a shopkeeper disable 3 armed raiders without taking a scratch. As the immediate crisis subsided and Kareth carried Scylla toward medical for standard checks, Lyra approached Daniel. He was leaning against a wall, exhausted now that adrenaline had faded. The limp was back, his leg clearly bothering him after movements it wasn't built for anymore. That was impressive, she said quietly. That was necessary, Daniel corrected. He touched his torn shirt, finally noticing how much of his tattoo was exposed. So much for anonymity. The raiders are Krell pirates, small-time opportunists. They'll be processed and sent to detention facilities. Lida posted, your identity is safe. I'll make sure the reports are filed appropriately. Daniel looked at her, searching for judgment or calculation in her expression. He found neither, just respect and something that might have been understanding. Thank you, he said finally. You protected a child at risk to yourself. That's what matters. Lyra gestured toward the medical bay. You should get checked out. That leg isn't going to appreciate what you just put it through. Daniel nodded, but didn't move immediately. He was looking down the corridor where Scylla had disappeared with her mother, his expression troubled. I scared her, he said softly. She saw me hurt those raiders. You saved her, Lyra countered. That's what she'll remember. Trust me. She was right, though Daniel wouldn't know it until later. In the medical bay, Scylla would tell her mother about the shopkeeper who'd become something else, something fierce and protective. About how his voice had changed, how he'd moved, how he'd stood between her and danger without hesitation. And Kareth would recognize the description for what it was, a warrior who'd chosen peace but hadn't forgotten how to fight when it mattered most. The security office felt smaller than it was, or maybe that was just the weight of the conversation pressing inward. Lyra had requested Daniel accompany her for a formal statement, and now they sat across from each other in a private room, recording devices deliberately switched off. You don't have to tell me anything, Lyra said. The incident report is complete. The raiders are in custody. Officially, this conversation isn't happening. Daniel's hands rested on the table, relaxed but scarred. The torn shirt had been replaced with a standard station medical tunic that didn't quite cover the edge of his tattoo. He made no attempt to hide it now. You want to know what I was, he said. It wasn't a question. I want to understand why a man with your skills is selling paper and teaching children to draw. Lyra leaned forward slightly. I already know you're no threat. I'm just trying to understand the story. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years compressed into words. Earth's Reconnaissance Division doesn't work like most military units. We didn't fly standard patrol routes or conduct ordinary surveillance. We went places other species couldn't go, gathered intelligence other methods couldn't obtain. He touched his shoulder, with a falcon's wings spread across his skin. The 82nd specialized in hostile environment insertion, high-gravity worlds, toxic atmospheres, extreme pressure or temperature, places that would kill most species within minutes. But not humans, Lyra said, understanding beginning to form. Earth is a death world by galactic standards. 1.0 gravity, oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere with trace corrosives, weather patterns that include literal freezing and boiling extremes, tectonic activity, intense radiation exposure. Daniel's lips quirked slightly. We evolved in conditions that most species consider uninhabitable. That gave us advantages. How long did you serve? 20 years. 347 missions. The numbers came automatically burned into memory. I flew reconnaissance in environments that range from gas giants to irradiated wastelands. Mapped enemy positions in places they thought were safe because nobody else could survive there long enough to gather data. Lyra absorbed this, piecing together implications. The Falcon. That's your unit symbol. Falcons hunt. They fly higher than most birds, see farther, strike faster. The metaphor fit. Daniel's expression grew more somber. We were good at what we did. Very good. Maybe too good. What happened? There was an orbital habitat disaster in the Korvax system. Structural failure during a solar storm. The habitat was breaking apart, spinning out of control. Radiation levels spiking. Gravity fluctuations. Temperature extremes. A death trap. Daniel's hands tightened slightly. 43 civilians trapped inside. Mostly families. Children. He paused, and Lyra waited patiently. Standard rescue protocols said to wait for specialized equipment, for radiation shielding, for the habitat to stabilize. Command estimated 6 hours before safe extraction could begin. Daniel's voice went flat. Analysis said the habitat would finish tearing apart in 90 minutes. Everyone inside would die. You didn't wait, Lyra said quietly. I couldn't. Not when I had the skills and equipment to try. Daniel met her eyes. Earth-trained pilots can handle higher G-forces, higher radiation exposure, more extreme conditions than most species. My ship could navigate the debris field. My suit could protect me long enough. I had a chance. 43 people, Lyra said. You got them all out? 43 people saved. One pilot permanently grounded. Daniel gestured to his leg. Structural beam collapsed during the final extraction. Caught me from hip to ankle. Shattered bone, severed nerves, damaged my inner ear. The medical team saved the leg, but my flight career was over. Can't maintain spatial orientation reliably anymore. Can't handle the G-forces. I was done. Lyra studied him with new understanding. They wanted to make you a hero. Earth's military command saw an opportunity. Decorated pilot with a dramatic rescue story. Perfect for recruitment campaigns, public relations, diplomatic functions. They wanted me to tour, give speeches, inspire the next generation. Daniel's expression turned bitter. Smile for cameras while children asked me to sign autographs. Attend ceremonies in dress uniform I could barely stand in. Be a symbol instead of a person. You refused. I tried to refuse. They insisted. Said it was my duty, my responsibility to serve in whatever capacity I could. Daniel's voice hardened. They didn't understand that I'd already given everything I had to give. I'd served 20 years. I'd sacrificed my career, saving 43 lives. I'd earned the right to rest. So you disappeared, Lyra said. I took my discharge settlement and vanished into civilian life. Changed my legal name, buried my records under medical privacy seals, found the quietest corner of the galaxy I could locate. He gestured vaguely at the walls around them. Station Harmony seemed appropriate. A neutral trading hub where nobody cared about Earth's military heroes. Where I could just exist without being special. The shop, Lyra prompted. I needed something to do with my days. Something that didn't require flying or fighting. Something peaceful. Daniel's expression softened. Paper and ink are simple. Honest. You help people find what they need, and they go away happy. No politics, no pressure, no expectations beyond basic service. And the children? Daniel smiled for the first time since the conversation began. The children were unexpected. Sila came in one day asking about colored pencils, and I showed her how to use them. She drew a picture. I put on the wall. Other children saw and wanted the same. Before I knew it, I was teaching art to half the merchant district's younglings. It suits you, Lyra observed. Teaching, protecting, just in a different context. Maybe. Daniel's smile faded slightly. But now that's complicated. People saw what happened with the raiders. They know I'm not just a shopkeeper. Does that bother you? I don't want to be special again, Daniel said quietly. I don't want to be the war hero or the elite soldier or the inspirational figure. I just want to sell paper and teach drawing and live quietly. Is that too much to ask? Lyra considered her response carefully. Among my people, we have a saying. The fiercest warriors earn their rest, but they never truly stop protecting. They just choose different battles. She paused. You protected Sila. You didn't do it because you're a soldier. You did it because you're a decent person who couldn't watch a child be harmed. That's not your military training. That's who you are. The military training helped, Daniel said dryly. Perhaps, but plenty of trained soldiers will have run toward safety instead of toward danger. You ran toward a child in need. That's character, not conditioning. Lyra stood, signaling the conversation was ending. Your secret is safe. I'll ensure the incident reports reflect necessary detail without exposing your background. As far as Station Harmony is concerned, you're a merchant who happened to have some self-defense training. Daniel rose as well, his leg protesting after sitting too long. Thank you. I mean that. Thank me by continuing to be who you are. The station is better for having you here, regardless of what name you use or what you did before. Lyra moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Earth's diplomatic mission here has likely heard about the incident. They may come asking questions. Daniel's jaw tightened. Let me guess. They'll want to recognize my heroism. Maybe suggest I participate in some publicity. Probably. You're within your rights to refuse. I will refuse. Firmly if necessary. He met her eyes. I pay my dues. I don't owe them my privacy or my peace. Lyra nodded approvingly. Good. If they give you trouble, let me know. Station security has jurisdiction over civilian harassment, even when the harassers wear official credentials. Daniel felt something in his chest unclench slightly. He'd spent 5 years waiting for his past to catch up to him, expecting judgment or exploitation or demands he couldn't meet. Instead, he'd found someone who understood, someone who saw both the warrior he'd been and the man he'd become, and respected both. You're a good officer, Captain Austin. You're a good man, Daniel Reed. She opened the door. Now go home. Rest that leg before it reminds you why doctors said you should never run on it again. Daniel limped out of security, making his way back through familiar corridors. Word of the incident had spread, and several merchants nodded respectfully as he passed, not with awe or fear, but with simple acknowledgement. He'd done a brave thing. They recognized it. That was all. His shop was as he'd left it, minus the lock he'd forgotten to finish turning before the alarm sounded. He secured it now, then stood in the quiet space, surrounded by paper and ink and children's drawings. The Falcon on his shoulder seemed less burdensome somehow, no longer a secret that needed hiding, but just a part of his history that informed his present. Tomorrow, he thought, Scylla would probably return. She'd have questions, maybe concerns. He'd answer them honestly, without hiding behind comfortable lies. She deserved that much. They all did. For night, though, he was just tired. The kind of tired that came from using muscles and reflexes that hadn't been tested in years. The kind that reminded him he wasn't young anymore, wasn't invincible, wasn't the pilot who could fly through impossible conditions and emerge unscathed, but he'd save a child. That still counted for something. He turned off the lights and headed home, leaving the shop to its peaceful darkness. Behind him, on the wall, Scylla's drawings hung alongside dozens of others. Small splashes of color and imagination. Proof that beauty could exist in a complicated galaxy if someone took the time to nurture it. 3 weeks passed before the rhythm of station harmony fully returned to normal. The Krell Raiders had been processed and shipped to a detention facility in the outer sectors. Security had tightened protocols. Merchants had reinforced their emergency procedures. Life continued, as it always did after brief interruptions of violence. That Daniel's shop remained fundamentally unchanged, except for one detail. He no longer wore long sleeves. The Falcon tattoo was visible now, and while some customers asked about it, most simply accepted it as part of who he was. A former soldier running a quiet business. Nothing remarkable in a galaxy full of people seeking second chances. The real change was subtler, harder to quantify. More families brought their children for art lessons. Parents who'd been hesitant before, worried about imposing or uncertain about the strange human who sold obsolete supplies, now felt comfortable. He'd proven himself trustworthy in the most fundamental way possible. He'd protected a child at risk to himself. Scylla had returned the day after the incident, clutching a drawing sheet made of a falcon flying alongside a dragon. Her mother waited outside, as always, but now Kareth made a point of greeting Daniel personally each visit. The Drakari merchant community had embraced him as one of their own, which carried weight in the broader station hierarchy. This particular afternoon found Daniel's shop more crowded than usual. Scylla and Torvin worked at one table. The young Drakari sister focused on shading while her brother sketched technical diagrams with increasing skill. At another table, two human children from the residential district practiced perspective drawing. A Vadran youngling worked on calligraphy in the corner, her parent watching proudly. Daniel moved between them all, offering guidance and encouragement. His limp was more pronounced today, the leg protesting after too many consecutive standing hours, but he ignored it. This mattered more than physical comfort. The shadow needs to fall this direction, he explained to one of the human children, demonstrating with quick pencil strokes. See? The light sources above and to the left, so everything casts shadows down and right. The child nodded, erasing and redrawing with careful concentration. Daniel moved on to check Torvin's work, noting the improvement in the adolescent's line control. The boy had talent for technical drafting, and more importantly, he had patience. You're getting good at this, Daniel said. Have you thought about formal training in ship design? Torvin's scales flushed slightly with pleasure. Mother says if I keep improving, she'll sponsor me for apprenticeship with the merchant fleet engineers. They need people who understand both Drakari ships and multi-species interface requirements. You'd be excellent at that work. Daniel straightened, stretching his back. Remember that different species see spatial relationships differently. What seems obvious to you might not be obvious to a Vadran or a human. Good design accounts for multiple perspectives. Like good teaching, Torvin observed, gesturing at the diverse group in the shop. Daniel smiled. Exactly like good teaching. The door opened and Lyra entered, not in uniform this time, but in casual civilian clothing. She'd become a regular visitor over the past weeks, though Daniel suspected her interest went beyond purchasing supplies. They developed an easy friendship built on mutual respect and unspoken understanding. Busy afternoon, she observed, finding a clear space near the counter. Art waits for no one, Daniel replied, helping Silas select a different colored pencil. What brings you by? Fair warning, actually. Lyra's expression turned serious. Earth's diplomatic attaché requested a meeting with you. I put them off twice, but they're insistent. Daniel's hands stilled. Let me guess. They want to discuss my service record. They want to honor it publicly. There's talk of a ceremony, a formal recognition of your rescue operations. Apparently someone in Earth's bureaucracy finally connected Daniel Reed to your old identity. Lyra posted. I told them you declined such recognition before. They said times have changed, that the diplomatic corps needs positive human stories to counter some recent negative press. In other words, they need a prop. Daniel's voice went flat, a hero to parade around for political purposes. The children in the shop had gone quiet, sensing the tension. Daniel forced himself to relax, to keep his expression neutral. Whatever frustration he felt about Earth's diplomatic corps had no place in this space. You can refuse, Lyra said quietly. You're a civilian merchant. They have no authority over you. Will they accept that refusal? They'll have to. I'll make sure of it. Lyra's eyes held steel. Station security doesn't appreciate harassment of merchants, even when it comes from official diplomatic channels. Daniel considered this, watching the children resume their work with the resilience kids always showed. They'd already moved past the uncomfortable moment, focused again on their drawings. He envied their ability to let things go so easily. Tell them I'm willing to meet, but not for a ceremony. He spoke carefully, forming the words as he thought them. If they genuinely want to discuss Earth's relationship with its veterans, if they want to understand why some of us chose to disappear rather than be celebrated, I'll have that conversation. But I won't be displayed like a trophy. Lyra nodded approvingly. I'll convey the message, and I'll attend the meeting with you, if you'd like. As your security liaison, I'd appreciate that. The door opened again, and this time it was Kareth herself, ducking low to fit her massive head through the opening. She held something carefully in her clawed hands. Shopkeeper Reed, she said formally. May I enter? Of course, though it might be tight quarters. Daniel gestured welcome. Kareth maneuvered inside with exaggerated care, her bulk filling a significant portion of the small shop. The children watched with wide eyes. Adult Drakari rarely came into spaces designed for smaller species, too concerned about accidentally causing damage. My family wishes to thank you properly, Kareth said, for protecting Scylla, for teaching both my children, for treating us with respect when many others show only fear. She extended what she'd been holding, a carefully wrapped package. This is a small token, but it carries meaning among my people. Daniel accepted the package, unwrapping it to reveal a carved wooden plaque. The craftsmanship was exquisite, showing a falcon in flight above a young dragon, both creatures rendered in loving detail. Beneath, in both human script and Drakari symbols, were words, guardian across species, teacher of the young, friend to those who fly. This is beautiful, Daniel said honestly. Thank you. It's traditional, Kareth explained. When a warrior chooses to teach rather than fight, when they protect the vulnerable without seeking glory, we honor that choice. You could have remained hidden, remained safe. Instead, you acted. That deserves recognition. Daniel felt something tight in his chest loosened slightly. This wasn't exploitation or political maneuvering. This was genuine gratitude from a parent whose child he'd saved. There was no hidden agenda, no expectation beyond simple acknowledgement. Hang it in your shop, Kareth continued, so all who enter know what kind of person runs this place. Daniel found space on the wall, between the children's drawings and his inventory lists. The plaque fit perfectly, its rich wood grain contrasting with the simple white walls. Scylla clapped her claws together with delight, pleased to see her family's gift displayed prominently. The afternoon continued with lessons and quiet conversation. More customers came, some buying supplies, others just stopping to see the plaque that was already generating discussion in the merchant district. Word traveled fast in close communities, and the story of the Drakari family's formal honor to the human shopkeeper spread quickly. This evening approached, and families began collecting their children. Lyra lingered at the counter. "You've built something here," she observed. "Something that matters to people." "I sell paper," Daniel said, but there was warmth in his voice. "You do more than that. You create space for children to learn, for families to connect across species barriers, for veterans like yourself to find purpose beyond war." Lyra gestured at the wall of artwork. "This is its own kind of service." Daniel studied the drawings, the bright colors and simple joy they represented. Scylla's falcon and dragon held pride of place now, joined by the carved plaque from her mother. Evidence of connections made, trust built, communities strengthened. "Maybe you're right," he admitted. "I wanted to escape being a symbol, but I suppose I became one anyway. Just a different kind." "The best kind," Lyra said. "Not a symbol imposed by authority or politics, but one that grew naturally from who you are and what you do." After she left, Daniel finished his closing routine, counting the register, organizing supplies, making notes for tomorrow's restock. Simple tasks that brought satisfaction in their completion. The kind of work that let his mind rest and his body settle into comfortable patterns that he stood at the window, watching the evening crowds move through the merchant district. Families heading home, merchants securing their shops, station life continuing its eternal rhythm. Somewhere in that flow, children he'd taught were probably discussing what they'd learned today. Parents were probably thanking each other for recommendations about the human shopkeeper who really cared about young people's artistic development. The falcon on his shoulder felt lighter somehow. Not hidden, not flaunted, just present. Part of his history that informed his present without defining his future. He'd been a warrior once, an elite pilot who'd flown impossible missions and saved lives at great personal cost. That mattered, and he wouldn't diminish it by pretending it hadn't happened. But he was also Daniel Reed, shopkeeper and teacher, who helped children understand perspective and shading while selling obsolete supplies to people who appreciated craftsmanship. That mattered too, maybe more in the long run. Wars ended, but education echoed through generations. He locked the shop and headed home, his limp steady but manageable. Tomorrow, Earth's diplomatic attaché would probably send another request for a meeting. He'd handle it on his terms, with Lyra's support, and make clear that his service had ended on his timeline, not theirs. Tomorrow, children would return for lessons, and he'd teach them patiently. Families would browse his inventory, and he'd help them find exactly what they needed. The station would turn, life would continue, and he'd be exactly what he'd chosen to become. Not a hero, not a symbol, not a warrior waiting for the next battle. Just a man who'd found peace by teaching others to see beauty in simple things, one colored pencil and one sheet of paper at a time. The greatest protection he could offer now wasn't fighting off raiders, though he'd do that if necessary. It was showing the next generation that differences between species mattered less than shared creativity, that fear could be overcome through understanding, and that the most powerful weapon anyone could wield was knowledge freely given. The Falcon had learned to rest. The Dragon Child had learned to draw. And somewhere between those two truths, Daniel Reed had finally found the quiet life he'd been seeking all along.